The hotel key hit the pavement with a dull thud. For a second, it didn't even register in my mind. But then, I stared at it, small, insignificant, yet somehow more important than anything else in that moment. It wasn't just a hotel key. It was a reminder. A reminder of a trip we had been planning for months, a trip that had once felt so exciting, so full of promise. But now, here it was, lost on the sidewalk as if it had never mattered at all. Our anniversary was months away, and yet, I felt that familiar chill creeping in, the kind that tells you that time is moving too fast, that somehow, something is slipping through your fingers. The key wasn't a symbol of our upcoming getaway anymore. It felt like the beginning of something else. Something I wasn't ready to face. She didn't notice it at first. She was too focused on her phone, flipping through messages, her eyes moving in that distracted way they had lately. I bent down and picked it up, holding it in my hand like it might shatter if I squeezed it too hard. Maybe it was the weight of it, or maybe it was the fact that it had fallen without her noticing, without her care. We'd talked about the trip for months. The place, the dates, the adventures we'd take. It had felt like our future was planned out, one perfect moment after another. But now, the anticipation of the trip felt like an illusion, a mirage. I wasn't sure what had changed, but I could feel it. I could feel it in the silence between us, in the way she no longer laughed at my jokes, in the way we passed each other in the hallways like two strangers who had just learned to coexist. I slipped the key back into her purse, careful not to draw attention to it. The conversation we needed to have lingered in the air, hanging between us like a heavy fog. But how could I say it? How could I ask her if this, whatever we were doing, was still real? How could I ask her if the trip, the key, still meant anything at all? She smiled at me, distractedly. "Everything okay?" she asked, glancing up for only a second before returning her focus to her phone. "Yeah, just thinking," I replied, and the words felt hollow. Thinking about what? Thinking about what we had become, or what we might never be. I had been avoiding the truth, just like she had. We were both pretending, keeping up with the motions of life, pretending everything was fine, pretending that we were still in love. I had no idea when it happened, or how it had happened. But somewhere along the way, the spark had dimmed, and we had stopped trying to reignite it. As we walked to the car, the weight of the key in her purse pressed down on me. It wasn't the trip we had planned that was causing the discomfort. It was the silence between us. The quiet, unspoken understanding that things weren't as they used to be. We weren't the same people we had been when we first made the plans for that trip. We were changing, but we were changing apart. She turned to me as we approached the car, and for a fleeting moment, I saw that spark in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Was I imagining things? Or had she already accepted the distance that had crept into our relationship? "Do you think we'll still want to go when the time comes?" I asked, unable to stop myself. She blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question. "Of course," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Why wouldn't we?" I wanted to tell her why, but I couldn't. I wanted to tell her that something had changed, that the trip didn't feel like something we were both looking forward to anymore. But I couldn't find the words. So instead, I just nodded, offering a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. The car ride was silent, save for the hum of the engine and the soft rustling of the trees outside. We weren't fighting. We weren't angry. But we weren't close anymore, either. I could feel the space between us, growing with every passing day. And that key, that simple hotel key, was a reminder of all the things we had planned, but never truly felt. When we arrived home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something fundamental had changed between us. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to pretend everything was fine, to believe that the trip would be a chance to rekindle something we had lost. But I knew better. This wasn't about the trip. This wasn't about the key. This was about us. About the way we had stopped paying attention to each other, about the way we had let our connection fade into the background of our busy lives. I stood by the front door, watching her slip out of her shoes and set her purse on the counter. She smiled at me again, but it wasn't the smile I remembered. It wasn't the smile that had once made my heart race. It was just a smile, polite, casual, like we were friends sharing a moment. And for the first time in a long while, I wondered if we had become strangers, living under the same roof. If we were just two people caught in the currents of life, too afraid to admit that we were drifting apart. The key in her purse didn't seem so important anymore. It wasn't a symbol of our anniversary trip, or of something we had looked forward to. It was a symbol of everything we hadn't said, everything we hadn't addressed. It was a reminder that even the most carefully planned things could slip away when we weren't paying attention. And in that moment, I realized that the hardest part wasn't that the key had fallen from her purse. It was that I wasn't sure if we would ever be able to pick it up again. The days following the fall of the hotel key were a blur of mixed emotions. There were moments when I thought things might change, that maybe, just maybe, we'd find our way back to each other. But each time I looked at her, I was reminded of the growing distance between us. It wasn't anything obvious. It wasn't a shouting match or an argument. No, it was the quiet things. The empty spaces that seemed to expand between us, taking up more and more of the room until it felt like we were two people living in the same house but not really living together at all. I spent my days going through the motions, pretending to be okay. Pretending that the trip still held the same significance it once had. But the truth was, every time I thought about it, I felt this creeping dread, like we were simply going through the motions of a trip we'd promised each other but no longer felt connected to. I wasn't sure what had happened. Was it the stress of everyday life? Was it the work, the deadlines, the constant need to perform? Or was it us? Had we simply changed without realizing it? Had we grown apart without even knowing it was happening? I kept thinking about that hotel key, still buried deep in her purse, hidden away like something that didn't matter. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, it was me who had become hidden away. It wasn't just the key. It wasn't just the anniversary trip. It was the fact that I had been keeping myself at a distance, unwilling to face what had become of us. I wasn't sure how long I had been doing it, but it was happening. Slowly. Insidiously. It wasn't just her anymore. It was both of us. We still had our moments, the quick smiles, the casual jokes, the polite exchanges. But they weren't the same. The spark that once made those little moments so meaningful had dimmed, and we were both too afraid to acknowledge it. I didn't know if it was because we were afraid of what we might find, or because we both feared that we were too far gone to fix it. Either way, I knew one thing, the trip wasn't going to fix us. It never could. I had tried to talk to her about it, but every time I did, she would brush it off. "I'm fine," she'd say, her tone too quick, too rehearsed. She didn't want to admit what we both knew, that we were drifting apart, that the connection we once had was slipping through our fingers. I could see it in the way she avoided my gaze sometimes, or how she seemed distracted when we were together. I could hear it in the way her voice lost its warmth when she spoke to me. She wasn't angry. She wasn't upset. She was just distant. And I didn't know how to reach her anymore. I had been trying to fill the void with work, with hobbies, with anything that would distract me from what was happening between us. But it didn't work. Every night, as I lay in bed beside her, I felt that distance, that invisible wall that had been erected between us. It wasn't like we fought. We rarely even disagreed. But something was missing. Something we had both neglected without even realizing it. The passion, the closeness, the deep connection that had once defined us, it was fading. And I didn't know how to stop it. One evening, as I sat in the living room flipping through an old photo album, one of those rare things we had done together before everything got so busy, I came across a picture of the two of us from years ago. We were laughing, sitting on a park bench, completely unaware of anything else. Our hands were intertwined, and there was this look on our faces, this joy that radiated from us. It was the kind of moment that made you feel like the world could fall apart around you and you wouldn't even notice. Looking at the picture made my chest tighten. That was us. That was who we used to be. But when I looked over at her, sitting on the couch with her phone in her hand, I realized I couldn't remember the last time we had laughed like that. I couldn't remember the last time we had shared something so real, so pure. I wanted to ask her about the picture, to bring up those memories, to remind her of the bond we once had. But the words felt like they were stuck in my throat. What if she didn't feel the same way anymore? What if she had already moved on? The thought scared me more than I cared to admit. So, instead of talking to her, I retreated into myself. I stayed silent, hoping she would notice the quiet tension in the air, hoping she would say something, anything, that would break the wall between us. But the longer I waited, the more I realized that I couldn't keep waiting for her to reach out. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that we were okay. It was like we were both standing on opposite sides of a room, staring at each other, too afraid to take the first step toward reconciliation. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. I had to ask her the question that had been gnawing at me for weeks. "Do you still want to go on the trip?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, really want to go?" She looked at me for a moment, her eyes distant, calculating, as if she were trying to figure out if I was serious. "Of course, I do," she said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. "Why wouldn't I?" but I could hear it. The hesitation. The uncertainty. And for the first time, I didn't believe her. Not completely. I don't know, I said, the words coming out more bitterly than I intended. I just don't know if it means anything anymore. The trip, I mean. We've been talking about it for so long, but it doesn't feel like we're really together anymore. It feels like a checklist. Like we're just going through the motions. She was silent for a long time, staring down at her hands. When she finally looked up, I saw something in her eyes, something that mirrored my own fear. She wasn't just avoiding the question. She was avoiding the truth. I think, she started, her voice soft, hesitant. I think we've both been so caught up in everything else, in work, in life, that we haven't really stopped to think about us. And now, I don't know if I can go back to what we were. I don't know if it's even possible. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been avoiding it, hoping it wasn't true, but now, hearing it from her, it was undeniable. We had been growing apart for months, and neither of us had done anything to stop it. I don't want to lose you, I said, my voice barely a whisper. But I don't know how to fix this. She reached out and took my hand, her touch gentle but firm. I don't want to lose you either, she said, her voice trembling. But maybe we need time to figure out who we are now. Without the trip. Without the expectations. Just us. I nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. I didn't know what the future held for us, or if we could even find our way back to each other. But in that moment, I realized that maybe we didn't need to fix everything at once. Maybe we just needed to stop pretending and start being honest with ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, that honesty would lead us back to each other. Or maybe it would show us that we had outgrown what we once had. Either way, we had to face it. Together. The days that followed our conversation were the quietest ones I could remember in a long time. She still went about her routine, just like I did. We moved through the house, making breakfast in silence, sitting in different rooms during the evenings, and only occasionally speaking when it was necessary. But there was no denying the tension that lingered in the air, a quiet understanding that neither of us knew where we stood anymore. We were both giving each other space, but what kind of space was it? Was it the kind that led to healing, or the kind that created a wider gap, an insurmountable distance between us? I spent more time than I cared to admit thinking about the past. About the times when things were easy. When the laughter came easily, and the touch of her hand in mine was all we needed to feel connected. I thought about our trips, our inside jokes, the way we used to dream about the future, about a life that seemed so full of possibility. Back then, our plans had been filled with optimism, with a certain kind of faith that no matter what came our way, we would face it together. But now, everything seemed different. I found myself wondering if this was something we could fix, or if it had already run its course, like water slipping through our fingers. What if we were just two people hanging on to something out of habit? What if the love we had once shared had simply faded without us noticing, until it was too late? But even with all these thoughts swirling in my head, I couldn't give up. Not yet. I was determined to find a way to make it work, even if I had no idea how. I couldn't shake the feeling that the trip, that damn hotel key, was a pivotal moment for us. I kept replaying the conversation in my mind. The way she had said we needed time to figure out who we were now. I had thought I was being strong, keeping my feelings inside, but perhaps the truth was that I had been avoiding it all along. I was too afraid to face the reality of what had changed between us. The hotel key was more than just a reminder of an anniversary trip, it was a symbol of something that we had both let slip away without realizing it. But I knew that sitting in silence wasn't going to solve anything. The silence only made the emptiness between us grow. So, a week later, I decided to try something different. I asked her if she would go with me, just for a walk. No plans, no distractions, just us. We walked in the park, side by side, not saying much at first. The cool evening air felt different, charged with the quiet tension that still hung between us. But as we walked, I could feel something shifting. I could feel that we weren't as far apart as I had thought. Maybe it was just the stillness of the world around us, or the fact that we were finally sharing the same space, not running away from the discomfort we'd been avoiding. I've been thinking about what you said, I finally said, breaking the silence. About needing time to figure out who we are now. She glanced at me but didn't say anything at first. Then, after a beat, she nodded, looking ahead. I don't want to be the kind of person who just walks away, she said quietly. But I don't want to stay in something that isn't real anymore. I nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. I don't want that either, I said. I want to try. I want to figure this out, even if it takes time. Even if we don't know exactly what the future holds. There was a pause, and then she stopped walking and turned to face me. Her expression was soft, but her eyes held the kind of vulnerability that had been missing from us for a while. She was afraid, just like I was. Do you think we can still get it back? The way it was. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I forced it down. I don't know, I said honestly. But I think we can try. I think we need to try. Even if it's just taking small steps to get back to a place where we don't feel so distant from each other. She let out a soft breath and looked down, as if considering my words. Then, to my surprise, she stepped forward and took my hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the first real connection we had made in months. The warmth of her hand in mine sent a ripple of relief through me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was alone in this. I think we've both been afraid, she said quietly. Afraid to admit that things aren't perfect, and that maybe we've been avoiding facing the truth. But we can't fix it if we keep pretending it's not there. I squeezed her hand gently, the simple act grounding me in the moment. I don't want to pretend anymore, I said. I don't want to live in this in-between place. I want to be honest with you. And I want you to be honest with me. I want to fight for us, for what we have, before it's too late. We stood there, hand in hand, not needing to say anything else. The silence felt different this time. It wasn't the heavy silence of avoidance. It wasn't the silence of uncertainty. It was the kind of silence that came with mutual understanding, with the shared knowledge that we were both in this together, no matter what. As we walked back toward the house, the weight that had been hanging over us for so long seemed to lift. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. I knew it would take time, and there would still be moments of doubt, moments when the distance between us would feel like too much. But we were trying. And that, for now, was enough. The next few weeks passed in a way that felt different. We weren't jumping back into the past. We weren't pretending that everything had been fine. But there was an openness now, a willingness to talk, to share, to admit the things we had been too afraid to say. And slowly, imperceptibly, we began to rebuild. We didn't talk about the anniversary trip for a while. But then, one night, as we sat on the couch together, she took out the hotel key from her purse, the same one that had fallen to the ground weeks earlier. You still want to go? She asked, her voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. I looked at the key for a moment, feeling the weight of it in my hand. I think it's time, I said. I think we're ready. And in that moment, I realized that the trip wasn't just about going away for a few days. It was about going forward. It was about us. The trip was still months away, but it no longer felt like an obligation. It no longer felt like something we had to do. It felt like a choice to take a step forward, to continue on this journey together, even if we didn't know exactly where it would lead. We didn't know if we would ever fully go back to the way we were. But I didn't need that anymore. I just needed us to be real. To be honest. To be together. And as we sat there, side by side, with the hotel key between us, I realized that sometimes, it's not the destination that matters. It's the journey. The journey we were choosing to take, together.